fortunately, on that scenario, the soul comes into play. The soul is the ultimate uncaused cause. So the soul has causal powers, remember. It gives us a moral compass, free will, our person. So it can cause things to happen in us, but it itself, being immaterial, is not subject to the laws of physics, therefore it is not caused. So it's the ultimate uncaused cause, and you have contra-causal or immaterial free will. If you ask someone who believes that, okay, what causes what you do? They'll say, my will does. Okay, great. What causes your will? Nothing. It's the soul, it's uncaused. So good. It's free, it's not caused. Now, of course, the problem is if you say, well, wait a minute, but science tells us that the soul is an illusion. Now they say, well, but there's a problem now because you remove the soul, then we're fully caused. If we're fully caused, we can't be morally responsible because we can't control our genes, our biochemistry, etc. That's a problem. That's the problem that people perceive. And you'll see that we have intuitions about this. Always doubt your intuitions, insofar as they are about how the world works. Evolution cares about fitness, not about truth. And so you'll see when you read Thinking Fast and Slow, that's the overarching message. The mind doesn't work the way you think it does. If it did, if you could simply introspect like Descartes did, you could close down all the psychology departments in the world, all the neuroscience departments in the world, and we'd be out of job.
That would be interesting.
That would be interesting. I'd have to think of a second career. Become a lawyer. So here's the intuition that many of us have. If you suppose we have this giant boulder here that's been sitting there for centuries, and below the boulder is a small village, set of houses with people in them. And one day, after a particularly violent storm, the boulder comes crashing down and kills half a dozen people. Now, suppose you ask yourself, well, could the boulder have chosen to do otherwise? And it did. Well, the intuition is right, exactly. You're saying that no, the boulder is fully caused. It's caused by erosion and gravity and the rain and whatnot. So there's no way that the boulder could have chosen to do otherwise, and it did. Okay. And that's in part why we don't hold boulders morally accountable. Although in the past, things were a little different. Now take another example. Take a troubled youth, young man who grew up in a terrible environment, doesn't have very good brain chemistry. He's a drug addict, sadly. And he needs money because he wants drugs. And he doesn't have money, but he has a gun, because we have guns here. So he goes to a 7-Eleven and points his gun and says, I want the content of the cash register. The guy says, no way. They fight, he pulls the trigger, kills the clerk. And now he asks, could this young man have chosen to do otherwise? And what's the intuition? No. Of course the intuition is yes. Right? Because intuitively we think of people as different from rocks. But even if the young man had, so there are two choices, either he killed on reflex, in which case there was no conscious intention. Right? But let's say to make the case against us even stronger that he had a conscious intention. I'm going to pull the trigger and kill that guy. Where do you think that conscious intention comes from? Not the ether, it comes from the operation of the guy's brain. Okay? Are you aware of the activity, the chemical activity? No, of course not. Right? And that in turn is caused by a panoply of factors, including the genes that he had, and the environment in which we grew up, and the laws of nature. So in other words, there's a complete causal chain that is uninterrupted, that takes us from the conscious intention, or the unconscious one, all the way to factors that the person could not control. In other words, we're fully caused, just like boulders. We're part of the causal nexus, like ants and galaxies and laptops and anything else. Well, that's a problem now, because you see, people would say, look, here's the problem. The problem is that if you tell us that boulders are fully caused, yes, and you tell us that people are fully caused, we don't hold boulders morally accountable, presumably because we think they're fully caused. So now you tell us that people are fully caused, so how can we hold them morally accountable? My answer to this is a false problem.
Yes.
Good. Because who says that the relevant dimension upon which you want to hang your notion of moral responsibility has to do whether or not you are fully caused? Another way to ask this is, could there be a dimension such that it would separate people from boulders and onto which we could hang our notion of moral responsibility? And the answer is, of course, yes. Take something as trivial as the power of reason. By that I simply mean something like, in a healthy, normal person, the ability to anticipate the consequences of our actions, the ability to recognize other people as moral agents, treat them in kind, etc., etc. Power of reason. Well, do we have this? Yeah, we have this. Even if it's what we call it, doesn't matter, we have this. Do rocks have this? We don't think so. Good. So now we have a distinction. In fact, that's the only distinction that matters in the eyes of the law. But I would, to be provocative, I could tell you, so that's one answer. Right? To say, look, this is a false problem, this is not relevant dimension, we have another dimension, we're good. But the provocative side of me, I've been thinking about this lately, is to say, well, who needs moral responsibility after all? I might say, what? Yes, who says we need moral responsibility? I planted this thought in your mind so that you can ask me about it. I don't think we need it actually. We could have a very fine system without this notion. Okay, we'll talk more about this. But if you don't like that, then I'll give it to you with this, and that's why. So there's a great paper, I'm happy to send it to you if you email me, by Joshua Green. I mentioned him a little while ago, and his former mentor, called For the Law. You'll see how this ties in now to punishment. Right? For the Law, neuroscience changes nothing and everything. In it, Green and Cohen talk about reasons why we have decided to punish people historically. And they distinguish between two kinds of reasons. One is based on retribution. It's a backward-looking approach. We look back at the action that was done. Say the guy pulling the trigger, we say that's the wrong decision. You could have done otherwise, and you didn't. You're a bad apple, we're going to punish you, we're going to make you suffer and pay for it. An eye for an eye. Okay, that's based on retribution. Now, for this to fly, you have to have libertarian intuitions. You have to believe that the person could indeed have done otherwise. Okay? Otherwise it makes no sense. It's otherwise like a boulder. There's another approach that exists, has been around for a while. It's called consequentialism or utilitarianism. The idea is that we don't look back, it's forward-looking. We say, look, someone did something terrible. Someone raped a young woman. That's horrible. Well, we can't undo the action, we can't go back in time and change it as horrible as it is. But what we can do is we can make sure it doesn't happen again. So we punish, quote-unquote, people to contain them, to make sure that the rapist doesn't rape again. And then we can discuss what kind of punishment we want to impose on the person. But we don't go back and say we're going to make you suffer because of what you did, however counterintuitive this may be. Now, that approach is based on a much broader set of intuitions about free will. It doesn't matter what your definition of free will is here. It's irrelevant in that case. Okay, so now I'm tying this back to what I said to you, that the wrong theories of the world of human nature lead to the wrong practices. This, as far as we can tell, is the wrong theory. If that's what we need to make people suffer, then if you remove this, because the wrong theory, then we don't need to make people suffer unnecessarily, because we intuitively feel that they could have done otherwise. And this leaves us with a forward-looking, consequentialist approach to criminal responsibility, unlike what we have here. I want to mention a couple of quotes to see how these authors make the point beautifully. They write that they maintain that advances in neuroscience are likely to change the way people think about human action and criminal responsibility. Free will, as we ordinarily understand it, libertarian free will, is an illusion. Retributivist notions of criminal responsibility ultimately depend on this illusion. And if we're lucky, they will give way to consequentialist ones, thus radically transforming our approach to criminal justice. They continue and say that at this time, this was a few years ago, the law deals firmly but mercifully with individuals whose behavior is obviously the product of forces that are ultimately beyond their control. Someday, the law may treat all convicted criminals this way, that is, humanely. And, remember him? He's now squid-eyeing and right, yeah, he's having fun. Well, at least he paid lip service to the issue. He noticed that we have a huge problem in this country with our criminal justice system, and at least said, well, we should do something about it. So the fact that we want to punish people, that we're harsh on people, people vote based on those intuitions to support harsher and harsher punishment. Politicians don't do that out of thin air, they have support. That has implications for how we all live. And if you start looking at the details of the law, it's frightening. So I'm going to summarize briefly and then show you another little clip. What I've tried to convince you, although I probably didn't need to do much convincing given the nature of the audience, is that the traditional soul that we define is not just a metaphysical claim, but a scientific one. Therefore, we can decide objectively whether we're likely to have such an entity or not. Science gives us every reason to believe that we don't. The conclusions that this entails go far beyond the domain of science, and we have nothing to lose, but in fact something to gain from this switch in worldviews. So now I want to show you another video clip that I usually play to larger audiences. That's an analogy for what I call the road ahead. So let's watch. Can you hear? Yeah? Can you really hear? No. Oh, shoot. So that's what I tell people usually in larger audiences which are mixed. I tell them that many of them may not be ready for that yet, not the music of the soul, but their kids will love it. So this is my website. You're ready for it, that's for sure. You can follow me on social media if you're interested, Twitter, Facebook. I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward now to chatting with you. Thank you. Part now. Okay.
All right. I have a question. It's a factual question.
Yes.
Give me the lights.
Okay.
Yeah, how about we shine some lights on the truth?
If I'm wrong, you please correct me, because I don't know.
I'll do that very gently.
And you don't have to be general, just say you're wrong, here's evidence.
Okay.
And if I'm right, I'd like you to come up with an explanation.
Sounds good.
When you say near-death experiences,
Yes.
to this audience or any large audience,
Yes.
where most of us are likely to think of a person who was in a coma or in the operating room and has the imagination or presumed experience of going to heaven.
Yes.
Or hell or whatever.
Exactly. True.
All right.
Hell, you're right.
Now, as far as I can tell, and do correctly, this is a recent phenomenon from about 1960, 70.
Raymond
All
Moody.
right. Now, there were tens of thousands, maybe more, persons who had what are actually near-death experience. They were near death and returned. Persons who were, you go through the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, all over the place. People who had operations before anesthesia.
Yes.
People who had pneumonia before 50 years ago, went into a crisis stage, came back, or didn't die, but the ones who recovered had near-death experiences.
Yes.
Now, if there isn't anything before 1970, and they all had these experiences, how come?
I'll give you a funny answer, and I'll give you a real answer. The funny answer is God gave us a soul around 1960, that's why. Okay. But okay, now the serious answer. In fact, it turns out that these things are much older. Guess who the first person is who described a near-death experience without calling it that? Plato, in the Republic.
Yeah, but that's...
No, but I'm serious. No, this is important, okay?
Well, I don't think anybody really thought of that as a near-death.
Well, they didn't call it that. They
Well,
called
no,
it-
that he actually experienced it. Take
If you read the description,
Yeah.
that's exactly the
Yeah.
kind of phenomenon that we're talking about. But that, okay, so that's one thing.
Thousands. How come?
Yeah, of course.
soul in heaven
Well, so let me
came
give you
up
more
with that?
background on this. So it is true that this phenomenon, well, okay, I'll give you another example. People have had seizures forever.
Yes.
We used to call it possession. Now we call it, so you might ask, how come we started talking about seizures only? Because we've made progress. But so the story of near-death experiences, people have had them, as you say, forever. Okay? Again, Plato seriously in the Republic talks about that, without calling it that. The term was coined around 1970 by Raymond Moody, who wrote a book called Life After Life, and it became a huge bestseller, and now everybody's talking about it.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's interesting, and you're right, tons and tons of people have had them. Sometimes they're positive, sometimes they're negative. Children have had them, people in the US have had them, people around the world have had them. So there's no doubt that these experiences are real in the sense that people experience them. The key question though is how do we interpret them? What do they mean? Right? That's the key question. Well, here you have a split. If you read the actual scientific literature, they'll tell, in fact, I can send you a paper published as a summary of all this research in a reputable scientific journal. The title of it is something like this: There is nothing paranormal about near-death experiences. But of course, these things have been interpreted by religiously inclined people as, ha-ha, this is evidence of the soul, the afterlife, and everything. Just like seizures and the like were interpreted as demonic possession, etc., etc. Okay? This is simply not the way that mainstream science interprets these facts. And there are good reasons for that. One is that you don't have to be near death to actually experience the symptoms.
Yes.
Someone with diabetes can have that. People with Alzheimer's can listen, can hear dead people talk to them and everything. Combat pilots who are spun around very fast because we don't want them to crash at $200 million planes that we don't need. Experience tunnel vision, etc., etc. We can now artificially induce many of the subjective manifestations by electrically stimulating certain areas of the brain. So there are very good reasons why we think that these are simply brain-based phenomena, however magical they appear, right? So that's the short answer, okay, people are raising their hands. Margaret,
in regards to the near-death experience, I want to invite everyone to the Pennsylvania State Conference for Freethinkers, Humanists, and Atheists, where I'm going to be on a panel about near-death experiences, because I also experienced that with Lori Lebo, who had a near-death experience, and our other panelist will be Andrew Newberg, who is a neurologist and specialist.
Yes.
Yeah, so that will be in October, the weekend of October 13th, 14th, and 15th. Please go to the website and sign up to go to the conference.
And I'll be in the audience screaming that those are soul-based.
Margaret, you were on that one television show talking about...
Yeah, that was Nightline.
Yeah.
And I was there being interviewed with Bob Woodward, who also had a near-death experience. And we had 4 or 5 other people.
I had one. I flatlined, and I didn't have a near. I saw reruns of MASH, but no, I didn't have a near-death experience. I flatlined, and I came back to life. The doctor saved me, but I didn't see lights at the end of the corridor.
You won't find that near-death experience program on Nightline because for some reason it got violated on a copyright issue, so it has disappeared from the internet. But it was a great show.
But somebody recorded it.
Hopefully.
That's all right. That's fine. Okay, I can go on if you'd like on the topic of near-death experiences.
I have a follow-up question.
Okay, sure.
related
Go
to
ahead.
that. I know Raymond Moody has also interviewed young children, very
Yes.
young children from around the world
Yep.
who talk about a previous life.
Yes.
And I guess, isn't he from like University of Virginia or something? I mean, he doesn't seem like
He's
he's
retired now.
like a quack.
I think that I'm not sure what his actual affiliation is, but possibly.
Okay. But I mean, it doesn't seem likely that these young children are making something up.
Well,
I mean, they
it
believe what they're saying.
It depends where you go. So India, for example, is a place where this happens a lot. Okay? Just to give you an example, you'll see how amusing it is. If you take a look at the book that Dinesh D'Souza, who's Indian, grew up in India, wrote, called Life After Death, The Evidence. He has a chapter in which he reviews two bodies of evidence. One is alleged cases of reincarnation, young children, and the other one is near-death experiences. What he concludes, being from India, is, look, you've got to be very careful about that. People in India, those people in India know that those things are going to attract a lot of attention. It's going to get them money. They're often from poor, rural areas. And there's no way to know whether or not this is made up. Okay? So that's one thing. And this touches on something crucial about how science is done and what we call evidence. Okay, so the word evidence is in fact ambiguous. There's what we mean colloquially by evidence. Oh, there's evidence that this and that. Okay? Now, scientists have a much more stringent notion of evidence. Only certain things count as scientific evidence. So you want things that are not anecdotal. So anecdotal evidence, not good. Why not good? Because you weren't around. The world is complicated. There are all kinds of extraneous variables that you could not control for. People could have made it up. You don't know. That's why we do controlled experiments in laboratories. Because we can control the environment. It's crucial. I'll give you an example. 1994, a guy called Douglas Bicklin comes back from Australia with a miracle cure for autism and mental disability called facilitated communication. How does it work? You hold a giant keyboard in front of an autistic individual, and he had a facilitator holding their sleeve to guide their jerky motion so they can type their thoughts. And miracle happens. Autistic individuals around the country start to say that they're trapped inside of bodies they can't control, that they want to do math, that they long for this and that. Takes the country by storm. Millions of dollars are poured. People are trained to be facilitators. Conferences are organized. Until, as in all good US stories, a sex scandal takes place. It's always a scandal. But seriously, now people started reporting, but really, so there were teenagers in schools, facilitating with their facilitators, and the facilitators asked them certain questions, and numbers of them started saying that they were being sexually abused by their fathers, by their mothers, by their grandparents, by their siblings. Okay, this made headlines. Lawyers got involved. One smart lawyer at some point said, wait a minute, we need to know in this case whether the communications really come from the autistic individual, because if they do this, it's outrageous that those poor people are being abused, or whether they're somehow influenced by the facilitator. Okay? The evidence, one could say, but look, there's evidence, that's what they said. Yeah, that's anecdotal evidence, but we want controlled scientific evidence. So how do we do that? What we do is we bring in an autistic individual with a facilitator. Okay? And we do a controlled experiment. We show one a picture of, say, a shoe. Say, you see this, okay? And then we show the facilitator. But unbeknownst to them, we flip the picture, we show them now a cup. Neither autistic individual nor facilitator knows that they saw different things. But now we make different predictions. If what's being typed is what the autistic individual saw, we're going to have shoe being typed. If it's what the facilitator saw, we're going to have cup. When they both see the same thing, and we get, say, they both see a shoe, and we hear shoe, we have what people in experimental psychology call a confound. We can't establish causality because we don't know whether it's coming from one or the other. What science is a method for trying to find out how the world works. So now you do things like, and guess what happens? Every time people have tried that, what's being typed is what the facilitator saw. Okay? Now, do you see what used to be thought as evidence? Not so clear anymore. That's why we need science. That's why when someone says, oh, I heard that you need controlled experiments. So all these things, and there's a very cute quote that I once heard, which is that the plural of anecdotes isn't data.
Yeah.
Okay? Right, so you can have as many anecdotal evidence that you want, they don't amount to actual data. Those don't count. So, now, could there be evidence for reincarnation? Yes. You do test these kids under controlled conditions. You control their environment to make sure they haven't talked to anyone, to make sure they haven't made anything up. But those things don't exist. They don't exist. If they existed, guess what? They'd be published in referee journals in Science and Nature, and science would take a different course. And people like me would love it because we do research on this, right? So that's a long story, but that's the sort of the response. All right, yes.
One of the statements made there was that there was no explanatory gain from
the soul.
Postulating a soul, postulating the soul.
Yes.
And I wonder whether does everything we end up believing in, even by blind faith, have to have a scientific reason to satisfy us? Many of us don't need a scientific reason for certain things.
Right, so
like for falling in love, and many other things. Where Santa Claus, whatever you like to believe in, whatever is comfortable for you. So, if that's the case, there is a pragmatic reason for being willing, as long as they're not harmful to us, or not interfering with what we should believe. For example, if I'm becoming a scientist, I better take some things out of the that kind of bag,
right.
Of the blind faith bag, yes. And so forth. Maybe religion, right. Especially.
Great question.
Right. So you see.
Oh, go ahead.
So this is just I wanted to ask. Yes. Does everything have to belong to that?
Well, so let me answer this question.
Scientific realm.
You see, it depends on the nature of the claim that you make. If you make a claim about how the world works, then yes, you're making a scientific claim. When you say I'm in love, you're simply reporting a subjective feeling. That's very different from saying, I think I know how particles work. So, different rules apply. But nobody needs to do an experiment on you to show that you're in love. We take you at your word. Because you're not making a claim about how the world works. You're simply conveying a feeling that you have. Now, you may be sincere or not. You could be lying. But if you don't care, but if you don't care in the first place, if you don't like to know the scientific details anyway. So, and you have to believe that there was a God, and he became Christ, and so forth and so forth. And these people are just so engrossed in that, and so happy with themselves, they don't take into account, they're willing to overlook the science. They're not working in science anyway. But so, yes, so hold on, guys. I'll just get to the question, then we can open the discussion. I agree with your description of how people operate.
Yes.
So, here's the thing. If those people kept those beliefs private, that'd be fine. But that's not the case. You see, they often, and there are people in the room who've spent a lifetime fighting this, want to impose those beliefs on you. And that's the problem. So if you believe in the soul, for example, you're going to be against abortion, most likely. Why? Because you're told that the soul enters the fetus, not even the fetus, at the moment of conception. Well, you see, the blastocyst.
Yes.
Yeah? At the moment of conception. If you want to die with dignity, now you're going to have all the religious, I mean, it's a choice. I would want to have that option when I'm at that point, if I don't die suddenly in an accident. And I would hate to have people who believe in invisible things that science tells us don't exist to actually dictate policies that are going to affect me. That's the problem. That's a huge problem. So, understanding how the world works, which is the domain of science, is crucial to all kinds of... In fact, it's crucial if we want to live in a democracy. We have to have people who can think critically. Right? Because we can tell BS from real stuff. That's crucial. Maybe, well, I mean, in principle, we'd like that. I mean, look, if... I'm not going to shock anyone to say that I'm rather appalled by what's happening in Washington, as I'm sure all of you are. Okay? This was utterly predictable with anybody, okay? Now, I don't want to disparage people who have suffered, who didn't have a chance to be educated the way we have, okay? And who could be fooled into believing certain things. There are people, for example, who did not know that the ACA that covered them was also called Obamacare. Okay, so, oh yeah, repeal Obamacare. Oh shit, that's what's covering me? Damn. That's terrible. That's terrible. So, we want people to think critically, precisely because we live in a complex world in which we have climate change and nuclear weapons and all kinds of things. We don't live in ancient Egypt anymore. We live in a complex world. It is an imperative that we understand how the world works to the best we can. And that we base our politics, again...
So a course in critical thinking would be useful, right?
No kidding, of course it would be useful. But the thing is, it's hard to teach. Not because it's hard to, the material isn't hard to teach, but critical thinking, think about this. I'm working on a book now on human reason, provisionally called The Rational Ape. We've had modern people with modern minds for about 150,000 years. We didn't get science right away. Science is a 400-year-old invention. How come we didn't get science right? We had the tools, intellectual tools to come up with science, but we didn't, because it's hard. In fact, it was an accident that we got science. So it's hard to think scientifically. It's in fact literally unnatural in a sense that can be made very precise. And it takes years of training at universities to become a professional scientist. So sadly, unlike religion, which is very natural in a way I could describe more precisely, we're fighting an uphill battle. Because what science is showing us is that all our intuitions, mostly about how the world works, including how we function ourselves, are wrong. So that's a hard battle to win. So yes, I'm all in favor. Here's one thing that I think we should do, we academics. The problem with us academics is that we live in a bubble. Okay? We publish in highly specialized journals, we talk to each other, we're not trained to communicate with the general public. Efforts to communicate with the general public are not rewarded by academic institutions. It's a huge problem. It's a huge mistake. So it means it creates a vacuum, and guess what it's filled by? It's filled by powerful interests who spread nonsense. If you think about the American population, about half of the people in the US literally believe, and half for decades, that the Earth is 6,000 years old, and that we were planted on Earth about 6,000 years ago. If you can fool people or have them believe that, when the case against it is so clear, just imagine when the issues are more complicated. Right? So yes, we do want science, we do want critical thinking, important. So there was another hand that went up. I love this, there are tons of questions, I love it, great. The gentleman in the front.
Watch the gentleman stuff, don't ruin my reputation.
I said gentleman.
I love your presentation, Julie.
Thank you.
Without question.
But, there's a but coming, isn't there?
No, I can. No, and.
Oh, good, good. Good.
Okay.
Good.
Listen, my business is mainly based on thinking and thoughts, distinguishing thinking and thoughts, which some scientists I've spoken to have no idea what I'm talking about. And I think it's beautifully pertinent to what you're presenting.
Great.
Belief.
Yes.
Okay? Without the phenomenon belief, I'll make a comment and then a question.
Sure.
Without the phenomenon belief, I don't think you present any of this, what you believe in.
Sure.
Okay? Now, my question is, which has been very useful in my business.
Okay.
Considering, have you ever heard Alan Watts' brilliant observation that there's no problem in believing except that we believe in belief? Have you ever heard that?
Daniel Dennett has talked about this also. So yes, I've heard the idea. Yes. So tell me how this applies here.
Well, if many of us use the term belief without distinguishing it.
Between belief and...
Well, belief, oh, we believe that, and then, I don't know how it happened, but we've taken truth and substitute belief for truth. And I think, without going into the wrong thing, that's why we kill each other. Is because we take on belief for truth. And
Yes. Yeah.
just not true.
So happy to address this. So if you think about the philosophical literature on human reason, which is very, very old, goes back. In fact, you could argue that that's what philosophers have been trying to do for millennia. There's a distinction they make between theoretical reason and practical reason.
Okay.
Theoretical reason is arriving at the right beliefs. in principle, ideally, the right beliefs would be ideally beliefs that happen to be true about how the world works and what it is. Practical reasoning is arriving at, or answering the question, what should we do? What should our actions be? Right? Okay? So not so much, and of course the two are connected. What you believe is going to dictate to some degree what you do. So I agree that belief is very important. I agree that... Yeah, please, go ahead.
What did you just say?
What?
What did you just say?
I said I agree that beliefs are very
Oh,
important.
agree. I thought you say I believe that belief.
No, I agree that beliefs are very important.
Okay,
Of
I'm
course.
sorry, I missed that.
That's fine, that's fine. Yeah, beliefs are very important. They're studied in psychology, they're studied in neuroscience, they're studied in philosophy. The idea isn't controversial. Nobody says, well, we don't have beliefs, right? So the question, I suppose, for so-called rational creatures, let me take a step back. If you are what's called a scientific realist, meaning that you assume that there's a world out there that really exists independently of us and our minds, which most scientists assume. It's a metaphysical assumption. We don't have to make it. But if we don't make it, we don't do anything. Right? So if you make that assumption, then having true beliefs would be having beliefs that happen to correspond to things that are out there in the world.
But I can't get that you can reconcile belief and truth. And we say that I believe it's true, and excuse my expression, but that's such bullshit. That's either you believe it, which is in the area of assumption, or I'd like to believe it, or that, but it cannot.
So let's talk about truth for a second. Right? One way in which we can have a meaningful notion of truth is under scientific realism. So if you assume that there's a world out there that's independent of us and our minds, then there's a fact of the matter. The world is some way or other, right? So if that's true, then in philosophy, we have something called the correspondence theory of truth, meaning that it makes sense to talk about truth insofar as what we mean by truth are things that correspond to stuff that's out there. So one question that philosophers try to answer of science is, how come our scientific theories are so good at predicting events, explaining things? How come we have cell phones and computers? How come? Right? Well, one answer is because they're very close to the truth. In fact, they're the best way we have to tell the truth, if this means anything at all. So, for practical reasons, we can say, look, we're going to assume that there's some notion of truth, and truth is whatever the world is out there, and we're going to be reasonable about things and say, look, the best way we've learned in the last 400 years that faith and revelation and authority are not, and your inner voice, are not reliable guides to truth. They're not reliable guides on how the world works. On the other hand, this method that was developed, invented in the late 16th century, early 17th century that we call science, that's the best we have. That's what's going to tell us if anything is true or not. For practical reason, we do want a notion of truth. So imagine there's a murder that was committed. We want to know. And if I'm accused and I say I didn't do it, right? Well, if we believe in an objective world, then if I didn't do it, it's actually true that I didn't do it. Truth matters. And in fact, we want to find out through the best methods we have that I didn't do it. So we want to hold to some notion of truth. Right? And we want to think about criteria that will help us decide what's more likely to be true or not. Now, an honest scientist, and I hope I'm one of them, will tell you we don't really aim for the truth. We aim for what we think is more likely than not. So we have Richard Feynman said that famously, that I don't have certain beliefs in anything. I have degrees of probability, there are things I believe are more likely than others, and there are things I believe are less likely than others, and there are things about which I don't know. Richard Dawkins, when he wrote The God Delusion, for example, opens the book by saying, look, I'm not going to say for certain there is no God, but I'm going to give you a scale from 1 to 7. 1 being absolutely sure God exists, 7 being absolutely certain it doesn't exist.
Yeah, but we kill each other because we...
No doubt. So no doubt that beliefs, Sam Harris makes this point over and over again, beliefs have consequences, okay? Our actions as psychological creatures are based on the beliefs that we have. And so that's why it's very important, given that we have this scheme for a arriving at beliefs that we think are more likely to be true, we have a gold standard. Why not use it? We should use it. And we, okay, so we can continue this discussion. The gentleman and the lady, yes.
It seems to me that the idea of a soul comes from the idea of the concept of consciousness, mind and body, the brain being the only organ that studies itself. I have a physical body and I've got a mind and I'm conscious. I'm aware that I'm human and that what I do has consequences, but we've got a couple of cats. And I believe that my cats believe they're cats. And
it's a tricky question. I mean, your cats are more likely than not conscious. Whether they believe that they're cats, I would not be no, but I'm not saying this tongue in cheek. I think it's not quite, you know. But anyway, go ahead.
Anyway, I think that people's idea of a soul comes from the duality of the conscious mind and the physical body.
Mm-hmm.
And I think just because of what we are and the way we express ourselves,
so
that people fall into that.
Yes. So the most famous person who fell into it was Descartes in the 17th century, who gave arguments precisely like yours. He said, look, if I introspect, you know the famous argument. He said, if I introspect, I realize that I could be fooled by all kinds of things. Maybe there is no real world out there. Maybe there's an evil demon, he said, that has fooled me into thinking that there's a real world out there, but that's just a dream, it's not real. And maybe that evil demon has fooled me into thinking that I have a body, and I don't have one. But he said there's one thing that is for sure. If I doubt, then I'm thinking, right? The fact that I'm thinking is undeniable. I think, therefore I am, right? I'm a thinking thing. And so he said, okay, you can't, if you can doubt of the existence of your body, but you can't doubt the fact that you're thinking, so the argument went, then thinking and mind are separate from the body. That's a terrible argument, that's the argument he made. And he made a few other arguments. So that's Descartes, that's for sure. And you were saying, oh.
I think that's the trap people get into.
That's one of the traps. But you're right that intuitively, it doesn't feel that we are just a body. It feels that the I, the self, the me, is some entity maybe behind my eyes that controls my body and everything. But we have to be very careful about how things seem to us intuitively. Because things seem to us too that the earth isn't moving, etc., etc. The whole purpose of modern scientific psychology is to actually take the third-person perspective and try to understand the mind from, I'm going to give you a fancy word that is kind of fun. It's called heterophenomenology. That's what we do in Young Tower, we come up with words like that. It means looking at things from the third-person perspective. And psychology abandoned the first-person perspective about 100 years ago. Okay? We started thinking in the sciences that, you know what, the thing that's going to be the most obvious for us to work out is not how galaxies are formed or stuff like that, it's how we function. Why? Because we have direct access to the conscious content of our thoughts. We don't have direct access to the stars, stuff like that. It turns out it's the hardest thing to do for all kinds of reasons. I teach a course these days called The Religious Mind at Rutgers. It's an introduction to the cognitive science of religion. And we do talk about where belief in supernatural concepts come from. What you touched on is definitely part of the story. Yes, it certainly reinforces this idea, this intuition that we have consciousness running separately from the body. But there are all kinds of other interesting ideas that it would take a long time to explain. Right? There's a notion of minimally counterintuitive concepts that so it's complicated. But the point I want to make is that we have